Good morning. This is a public hearing of the Chatham Conservation Commission being held on Wednesday, May 27th, 2020, in accordance with the provisions of the Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, the Wetlands Protection Act, and the Town of Chatham Wetlands Protection Bylaw, Chapter 272. My name's Janet Williams. I'm the chair of the Conservation Commission, and I am opening this hearing at 9:02 a.m. Today's hearing is being conducted via remote teleconference pursuant to Governor Baker's emergency orders prohibiting the gathering of large groups of people. Every effort's been made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided in the order. And just remind everybody that folks watching on Channel 18 who want to participate in this hearing while it's in progress may do so by calling into the phone number that's displayed on the screen. And a reminder that the agenda and copies of all documents for review today have been posted on the town website. On May 12th and again on May 21st, I issued a declaration regarding scheduling of hearings for the applications that had been filed with the Commission since the onset of the emergency. As a reminder, on March 10th, in response to the emergency, Governor Baker declared a state of emergency and issued an order that, together with subsequent orders, imposed strict limitations on the number of people that can gather in one place. This state of emergency will last until the governor affirmatively lifts that order. On April 3rd, 2020, the Massachusetts legislature passed the Acts of 2020 to address the challenges faced by municipal authorities resulting from COVID-19. The Acts of 2020 suspended all regulatory and statutory deadlines applicable to conservation commissions. The result is that during this state of emergency, there's no requirement that commissions take action, whether opening a hearing or issuing an order of conditions within a specific time period. The Act of 2020 provides that this suspension of deadlines will continue in place until 45 days after the governor lifts the emergency order. In addition, Section 17B of the Act of 2020 provides that a board or commission chair may schedule and reschedule hearings one or more times by declaration without the need for approval by a quorum of the board or the commission. Notice of the rescheduling, including the new date, must be provided to the applicant and posted on the town website. The Chatham Conservation Commission has been working throughout this state of emergency in an effort to continue to process and hear applications and issue orders of condition in as timely a manner as possible. However, we've learned that working remotely and holding hearings on a teleconference platform has slowed down an already complicated process. I have therefore exercised the authority conferred on me by Section 17B5 of the Act of 2020 as chair of the Conservation Commission to declare that the following applications have been scheduled for hearing on August 25th. 7 Old Harbor Lane, 267 Cedar Street, 24 Avalon Point Road, and 35 Sears Road. These dates are in addition to the applications that were previously scheduled for hearings under the prior declarations that I made. All scheduled hearings have now been posted and consolidated on a list that's available on the town's website. So you can always check what the scheduled date is. So now we have a record of the quorum of the commission attending today. I'm going to ask each commission member to indicate their presence on this call by stating their name and present. So roll call, Commissioner Holt.
Present.
Commissioner Kitts.
Joe Kitts, present.
Commissioner Walls.
Present.
Commissioner Delvecchio.
Delvecchio, present.
You, Commissioner Clark.
Present.
Okay, thank you all. We're ready to get going. One last note, similar to the note we made at the last hearing, that we have heard some of the frustrations expressed by applicants with respect to the scheduling of hearings. We are listening. We have requested additional resources from the town so that we may increase the number of hearings that we are able to hold. We do need some more resources to do that. We are mindful that these are not the best times to be asking for additional resources and staff. Nonetheless, in an effort to move things along, we have requested that. Until we get that, or until the emergency ends, whichever comes first, we're going to keep doing the best we can to move things along. So in the spirit of that, I'll ask once again for applicants to make sure that the materials that you submit are as complete as possible so that the commission doesn't have to continue hearings to wait for complete submissions. I'll also remind representatives and commission members that to keep things as efficient as possible, we should focus our attention, both in the applications and in our questioning process, on the performance standards that apply to each project, asking the question, can this project be conditioned to comply with the applicable performance standards, and stay focused on that. And with that, we will go to the first item on today's agenda.
Okay, Janet, this is Callie. Just one quick thing before the agenda. I just wanted to reiterate that no one is monitoring the chat function of Teams. So the best way to be heard at the meeting today is to speak up and the chair will identify you. There's no one monitoring the chat function. I just wanted to reiterate that.
Okay, thank you, Callie. That's a good reminder. So if you do need to say something, unmute yourself and wait to be recognized. Okay, thank you.
Okay, request for 1-year extension, 0 and 110 Old Saltworks Road, Joseph Marzilli and Stanley L. Clark, trustees of the Goodrich Chatham Realty Trust, are the property owners. SE 10-3216, request for a 1-year extension to maintain and repair shorefront protection systems and remove dead trees. As the agent, I recommend issuing the 1-year extension. This is the first extension for the project. And I believe the attorney is here for this property owner if you guys have any additional questions.
Okay, thank you, Callie. Do we know where they are in the process of having the work underway and where it is in terms of completion?
I think they are pushing hard on it. I can go ahead and show you guys the letter that verifies that, if you'd like to see that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But it is underway and work is being pursued.
Yes, I
And
believe.
it's the first extension request. When does this expire? And is it August this year?
Yeah, I believe
Okay.
so.
Okay. Other questions from other commissioners? Is there a motion to approve the request then?
Commissioner Holt moves approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Bob Rawls, second.
Thank you. Roll call vote to approve. Before we do that, any other discussion, or does the representative want to say anything? Okay. Hearing nothing, roll call vote to approve the request. Ms. Holt?
Aye.
Mr.
Aye.
Mr. Rawls?
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Approved.
Okay. The next extension is for 200 and 202 Cockle Cove Road. Joseph F. and Denise M. Barasa are the applicant. SE 10-3218. Request for a 1-year extension to remove the 2-bedroom lower cottage, construct a 3-bedroom dwelling in its place, construct a raised deck, install an outdoor shower, replace an existing patio, construct a covered porch, replace a stairway down to the pond, install a pervious patio, construct a shed, remove invasive plants, and install native plants. They're requesting a 1-year extension for an additional growing season for the plants.
So the work has all been, the construction is completed. This is the mitigation plants.
Sorry, let me pull up what the letter says here. Request for 1-year extension, take advantage of another growing season. Although the bank is revegetated, additional growing season associated monitor will benefit the coastal bank. They're planning to submit for the final next spring.
Okay. Oh, personally, I'm always happy to give an additional year for the plants to continue. Other questions from other commissioners? Okay. Anybody, any participant? Is there a motion for approval of this request?
Commissioner Holt moves approval.
Thank you. Second?
Commissioner Kitts, second.
Thank you. Roll call vote to approve this request. Ms. Holt?
Aye.
Mr. Kitts?
Aye.
Mr. Rawls?
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio?
aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Request is approved.
Okay, next up on the agenda are new notices of intent. 45 Barcliff Ave Extension. Barcliff Market LLC, SE10 3411, proposed restoration landscaping at 45 Barcliff Ave Extension, Assessors Map 16F, Parcel N1.
Okay. All right, so we have two plans, I guess. One is the existing conditions plan, and then there's a second sketch plan that shows the planting area. But they're not integrated. It looks to me like the sketch plan references the existing conditions plan, but doesn't have the same level of detail. And I don't know whether that's a problem that people have with trying to understand that and consolidating them. It's a pretty straightforward project. It's small. It's definitely, at least from the public safety perspective, it's definitely needed. However, it is activity in the non-disturb zone and within land subject to coastal storm flowage. So I had a hard time what was missing from my perspective in reading over this application is a specific discussion of the resource areas and the performance standards tied to those resource areas. Is Joyce on the phone? Is there?
David Clark is here.
Oh, hi, David. I'm not sure whether this question would be more specific to Joyce if she wrote the narrative on the landscaping project.
Yeah, well, I can address the resource areas and the performance standards.
Okay.
David, real quick, David, it's very hard to hear you.
Okay.
Is it possible for you to speak up a little bit?
Sure.
Great.
So regarding the resource areas, the primary one is land subject to coastal storm flowage, and that's primarily the parking area and the existing seating area where the picnic tables are. Right now, there's an asphalt parking lot and a well-worn grass sitting area for the picnic tables. And so there's impervious surfaces within land subject to coastal storm flowage. The proposal, as you know, there are no performance standards under the state regulations. Under the local regulations, it basically comes down to the ability of the land to absorb and contain floodwaters. The proposal is to remove a substantial portion of the asphalt parking where it really isn't needed to contain a vehicle and change that over to pervious pavers. I provided drainage calculations showing that when the project is finished, there will be a reduction in stormwater runoff from this property. The other resource area is a coastal bank. This is a man-made coastal bank. This area was excavated out in the 1950s for the expansion of the market, so it's not a naturally occurring landform. When the new septic system went in last spring, they removed some railroad tie retaining walls along the edge of the parking area, and they didn't put it back because they felt it was stable. Part of Joyce's plan is to put in a more natural retaining system with small boulders and a sitting wall. Again, it's a man-made bank. I think this activity will shore it up, and also the vegetation that's above the proposed wall is just a really rough grass area, and Joyce is proposing a substantial replanting of that area with native, more robust plantings to basically make that slope stable in perpetuity, we hope. That's it.
Okay, thank you. There was a note I noticed in the narrative, in Joyce's narrative, that she was proposing pruning on the adjacent property of some invasives. Is that?
That would be just the invasives that are hanging over the line. We were at one time considering removing invasives on the neighbor's property as part of this, but the two projects didn't come together in time to get this finalized.
Okay, so any pruning is limited to what's overhanging the
Yes.
applicant's property.
Yep.
Okay, and is the planting that's proposed, is this being proposed in mitigation for the hardscaping?
Yeah, I think it's more of a restoration of what's there. It could be considered mitigation, although there's a reduction in impervious surfaces. There is a slight increase in overall site coverage. But we felt that the removal of unused parking or asphalt was mitigation for the extension of the sitting area.
So the only part of the currently paved, which is newly paved parking area that's going to be disturbed is where the asphalt's going to be removed,
Yes.
and the rest will stay as it is? Because those
Yeah,
spaces are longer than they need to be, so you can
Yes.
just move some back.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay, commissioners, questions, comments?
Commissioner Holt?
Yes. Go ahead, Dee Dee.
This project, as was just mentioned, came before us a few months ago. And I think at the time, the resource area, the coastal bank, was recognized as a resource area, right? And this being the no disturb zone. And so there was a analysis or I guess, evaluation of the project and performance standards.
That's probably true.
I think from then, the resource areas haven't changed. Is there a way for us to get the same, I guess, address this performance standard for our coastal bank in this proposal, this project?
If you'd like it in writing, I can certainly provide that.
Yeah, as part of the narrative. I mean, there is a part of the narrative that's labeled performance standards, but it doesn't actually identify which performance standards are being applied and how the project is being structured and designed to meet them. So it's hard for us to write an order.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can provide that.
Okay, great.
And just another thing, is the thought that the site plan showing the new patio and the changes to parking area and the planting area, the wall, that would be submitted as an as-built? Is that the plan instead of providing it in advance of the project?
I don't understand your question. Joyce has provided a site plan showing the.
Well, her site plan is, I mean, it's there. You know, there's no engineer stamp. If you're talking about this one, you know, there's no engineer stamp on it and anything, and she doesn't show the resource areas.
But that's why we provided an existing conditions plan.
but there's nothing, you don't show on the existing conditions plan the location of the proposed project, which is required in the NOI checklist.
So, boy, this is really escalating the amount of work that has to be done to do a filing. You know, this is a simple landscaping plan.
David, you did it
so
already.
you want the engineer now to provide landscaping plans? What's the
No.
point of having a landscape professional?
No, I
No.
think miscommunication here.
There's two things I think that we're saying. One is that we've already covered, which is that the narrative that applied in the prior filing, which identified the relevant resource areas and performance standards, needs to be added to this, because that's required in this kind of a filing. And what we're struggling with is the integration of the site plan, the engineered site plan, and the proposed landscape plan. One shows one set of facts and the other shows a separate set of facts, but they're not integrated. So it's hard to look at the landscape plan and understand exactly where the resource area lines are.
And David, you did this previously for the septic. You did exactly what was required for this site for the septic work.
Right, and my stamp on that plan is means that I'm responsible for all the information on that plan. I'm not taking responsibility for retaining walls and this patio. It's not my design. And so there's an assumption, somebody looking at that plan in the future is basically saying Clark Engineering is responsible for that. That's my issue with stamping a landscape plan.
No, I don't think we're asking you to stamp the landscape plan. Is there a way to put what was proposed on as a layer on top of your existing plan, or is that you're not willing to do that because you didn't design or engineer any of the retaining walls there?
I can show it on a engineered site plan, but there would be a note saying referring to Joyce's plan for the details.
I think that would be acceptable. It's just as long as they're both shown on the same thing, we're not going to hold you responsible for the landscaping details.
This is the way we've worked in the past. Like when someone's putting in a patio and a pool and mitigation plantings, it's shown on the plan, but all the details are on the landscape architect's plans. So I don't think this is anything new.
Yeah, and you did it, David, for the project that's next up. The one where you worked on Homestead Lane with Lindsay. I mean, just as an example.
Yeah. No, I don't mind doing it. So I can have that ready and submitted by next Wednesday.
Okay.
When's our next work session? Is that the
June 3rd, next Wednesday.
Dee, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I'm sorry. It was just those things I mentioned.
Other commissioners, other comments and questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Tom, go ahead.
Oh, well, Mr. Clark noted that he would have the plans to us by, if we agree to it by the next meeting. One of the problems I've had, as you know, is that we keep getting documents at the very last minute, which makes it difficult to review them. This is just another example of where we're going to get things possibly at the last moment, which makes it really difficult to properly assess them. I just raised that as an issue that hopefully the chair would take into account and perhaps issue some kind of standard for timely filing of documents.
I believe we already have a standard.
Yeah, I didn't intend for you to act on the plan next Wednesday. I was simply stating I was going to get it to you by next Wednesday in anticipation of you reviewing it on the 10th.
Okay, that works well. That's fine.
Okay.
With that in mind, is there anything else? What else would we like? Is there anything else that people need in order to make a decision on the conditions for this project? I have a question, David. In terms of, do you know, in terms of cutting into the toe of the slope that's referenced, are there grades going to change? Is there grading?
No, so it was basically cutting in a couple of feet to get the stones in, and then probably using that material that's removed to backfill the stone to create a short little shelf behind it. But
Okay.
this is not a major excavation. This is just
Okay.
simply letting these stones into the toe that's there now.
Okay. And where that's going to be physically is that where they set up the cinder blocks and the bar? Do you know if you've been there recently?
No, I haven't been there in over a month, so
Okay.
I haven't seen what's going on.
Okay. It looks like they've set it up to show where it's going to be.
Janet,
The other thing, I'm sorry, before you go, we would want to, I do think this invasive removal and planting is appropriately considered mitigation for the hardscaping that's going on, even though it's a reduction of pervious, it's an increase in overall hardscaping. So we would want to add in the order of conditions, the usual monitoring of those plantings and reporting. If Joyce has anything different to propose on that, she should do that by next week. Go ahead, Callie.
I just wanted to say I had a few, sorry, I found a lull in the conversation, so I just wanted to give you a heads up
I jumped in.
that I had a few items to ask David, but I'll go last.
Okay, anybody else before?
Commissioner Holt, I have one other thing. If we wait, when's if we continue this to the 10th,
Mhm.
it wouldn't be until August that July, that an order of conditions would be issued. Is that right? Early July?
The next scheduled work session would be July 1st. However, I am pushing the town to provide the resources that we need to have a work session in the interim in mid-June to try to get some of these orders out. So
Yeah.
at the latest, it would be July 1st. It may be mid-June if we're successful.
Because I think one of the reasons for this project is the safety of people who would be dining outside, and the busy season is going to be starting. So and also for the sake of getting the plant started, I think, the earlier that we can allow work to proceed, the better it's going to be for the applicant's project.
Agreed.
Mr. Delvecchio here.
Yes, Bob, go ahead.
I just have speaking of safety, I have just a comment on safety. Where the asphalt parking spaces are, I think we should incorporate some wheel stops or curbings where before the boulders, so the cars will park up against those wheel stops or curbings so that they don't hit the boulders and cause an accident.
Well, the purpose of the boulders were basically in lieu of curb stops. If we had wheel stops, curb stops, we wouldn't need the boulders. So it's more of an aesthetic thing.
You don't think people will? I mean, it's going to be a busy parking lot. You don't think people might over jump the that area and run into the boulders from time to time?
Given it's a possibility. People, given the who lives in Chatham, it's a possibility.
Well, as long as the boulders are providing the level of public safety, I think it's a matter of aesthetics in terms of how that level of safety is being met. So if the boulders protect people sitting there, that's fine with me.
Just a consideration.
Anybody else? Anything else? Okay, Callie, go ahead.
All right, I just had a few questions about the patio and the vacuuming. I don't know if these are better for Joyce, but I was wondering, I know from past employment about permeable pavement and pavers, and that the maintenance of those pavers or pavement over time is very crucial, because as soon as those pores fill up with grit, which you identified in your NOI, then the permeability of that surface becomes greatly reduced. So you had mentioned that there was vacuuming that was going to take place as part of the maintenance plan for the patio. And I was just wondering a little bit more detail about that vacuuming. Is it a special machine that you envision? Is it a household vacuum machine? I was just wondering if you had any additional information on the maintenance of those pavers.
Yeah, because the area is so small, a shop vac would be suitable for maintaining that area.
Okay. And do you know, David, who will be installing those pavers? I know that permeable pavement typically involves a sort of specialized contractor to do the work with experience putting in that material. Has there been a contractor selected for that permeable patio?
No, and the expertise really comes in to play with pervious asphalt and pervious concrete or permeable concrete. So cast in place, that is very critical in it, and it requires training to install that material. But these are just porous paving blocks, the modular. I think any landscape contractor can install them.
So it wouldn't necessarily be, I know some landscapers do actually do some hardscaping. It wouldn't necessarily be, the install wouldn't necessarily be done by Joyce Williams. It might be another subcontractor.
Correct.
Okay. And last two questions. The installation of the patio, do you imagine it having any impact on the roots of the surrounding trees? I know there is, I think it's a cherry tree that's there. And I noticed there's a well that you guys are going to be putting around it to preserve it. I just didn't know that sometimes the permeable materials need to go down, the drainage actually needs to go down a little bit deeper, and I didn't know if that would impact the roots of the trees.
I can get an answer to that and include it with the next submission.
Okay. And then lastly, I noticed in Joyce's narrative that she's going to be using mulch for the area around the plantings, and I just didn't know if, based on your opinion or her opinion, if the migration of the mulch into the actual permeable pavers would potentially become an issue for the permeability of that surface.
Okay, I will find that out to you.
Okay.
I'll have an answer for you for that.
Okay, thank you, David. Any other questions or comments? Any participants' questions? Anybody wish to speak to anything? Okay, hearing nothing. Oh, go ahead.
Ms. Holt,
Cutting you off.
No, I'm sorry. It's just, it would be, I think, beneficial to be able to ask questions directly of the landscape person. So it would be helpful, if possible, that she be on a call whenever this is continued to.
June 10th it'll be, so David, if you can ask Joyce if she can be available that day. Thank you. All right, do we have a motion then to continue this to June 10th?
So moved.
So moved.
I'll take that as a second, Dee Dee. Roll call vote to continue to June 10th. Ms. Holt?
Aye. Aye.
Mr. Kipps?
Aye.
Mr. Walls?
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The matter will be continued and brought up again on June 10th. Thank you very much, David.
You're welcome.
All right, the next item on the agenda is 39 Homestead Lane. Ann Poppleton, trustee, is the applicant, and our Poppleton Revocable Trust is the owner. SE 103412, proposed removal of non-native vegetation, replanting with native vegetation at 39 Homestead Lane, Assessor's Map 15C, Parcel 2-1.
David Clark here on behalf of the Poppletons. This is a straightforward bank restoration. Lindsay Strode, I think, is on the line.
Yep.
Lindsay brought this project to us. The Poppletons want to restore the bank and plant natives. I think it's pretty straightforward. Lindsay did provide a narrative as to the execution of the project, and he's here to answer questions on that.
Okay, thank you, David. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi there.
Janet, if it's all right with, yeah, we can. And if it's all right, can I put up the plan?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, it's up.
All right, thank you. Yeah. We go a little bit more, a little bit more. There we go. Okay. You can see, all right, there's 150 line, 2 lines. Questions? From commissioners?
I had a question.
Yes, Tom, go ahead.
I just wanted to confirm that the ivy was being removed, and if so, how?
That is correct. The ivy is to be removed. We were going to treat the ivy at an appropriate time and then cut it without destabilizing the coastal bank.
Were you intending to use some sort of herbicide like triclofor on the ivy?
Carlon is what we use in this situation, which is triclopyr is the active ingredient.
And you wipe it as opposed to spraying it, I presume?
It depends on the application. We can do either.
What did you intend to do in this situation?
Because it's so dense, I would use a low volume spray in the area specifically for the ivy. And then the invasive plant material would also get Garlon, and that would be a basil bark application.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Other questions?
Yeah,
Go
Bob Ross.
Yes.
I noticed that, are they tiger lilies or daylilies on the bank?
Those are just, I think, daylilies. And they're pretty aggressive off to one side. And then as you get in, I had the pleasure of climbing in and underneath all of that vegetation. And there is some remnant daylily in there, which I would intend to leave and then just plant around and through it as the installed vegetation establishes. I would expect them to either decline or just maintain in more open situations. One of the things that we'll probably find once we remove most of that invasive cover is that the daylilies will continue to establish.
Yeah,
But I had not a plan to remove the daylilies.
yeah, I saw that, and I noticed there's a lot of, I was reading about daylilies versus tiger lilies. I noticed there's a lot of confusion on the web about the two, whether they're the same, whether they're different. And then that's the reason I asked what you had, because a lot of states consider them to be highly invasive plants, but I see that Massachusetts doesn't necessarily see them that way. So I don't know what your feelings are about them, but my experience has always been that they're pretty invasive.
They are invasive, but they do have a pretty substantial root system. And at this point, I'd like to maintain, that's kind of the same reason I'm not excavating anything, the ivy being an example. I want to utilize the fibrous nature of the root system to maintain the integrity of the bank, and then just deal with the above portion parts of the plant. We could do the same thing with the lilies at a later date as well.
Right, yeah, I understand that their value in holding the bank while you're working on it, but over time, it may make sense to try to get rid of them. That's all I had.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Lindsay, do you know, can you estimate the percentage of the vegetation on this bank that you're planning to remove as invasive?
I don't have an exact number. I don't know answer to your question. Short answer, no.
Okay.
Commissioner Holt, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Dee Dee.
I may have missed it, but is there a discussion of the performance standards for Coastal Bank and Salt Marsh?
I did not see one.
No, there is not that I found either.
That's
Yep.
in the checklist. We should have one.
Yep.
And also for the adjacent upland resource area, the buffer zone.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I have a few, Janet, when
Yes,
you're
go
ready.
ahead. I think we're ready. Go ahead, Callie.
Okay. This is for Lindsay. Is there any trees that are going to be removed, replaced, transplanted, or planted? You had checked that off as an item on the checklist, but I just wanted to make sure because I didn't see anything on your plan that showed like a tree outline of a tree canopy with an X through it. So I just wanted to make sure that what you were planning to do with any of the tree material, I would imagine it's all staying. Is that correct?
Any that is existing is staying. There's an apple that's on the bank that we're certainly gonna leave. We'll be pruning it up. But any trees that are there that are alive are staying.
Okay, is it possible then to maybe give us a little bit more information about, because I know it's a very thick, steep area, and is there any way to, if you are going to do some pruning, or if you think there is a lot of dead trees there, is there any way for you to provide more information on that?
Certainly. It was
Okay.
easier to see in March or in February what was there. It's a little more aggressive right now, but we can get in there. That's not a problem.
Well, you and I visited the site a little while, right before the tornadoes last year. I can go back and see if I have any photos of the site. Even if photographs are easier, if you have those, I think that might suffice with the commission.
Okay.
I also, for the grasses that you're going to be planting, on the planting schedule here on the plan, it doesn't show a number, but what you have on your narrative, I'll just go there quickly if everyone's following along. You do provide substantial information on the grasses. Is it possible, is this in reality is this what you're actually going to be doing, or are you sort of leaving it open on the plan in case you need to make some, field decisions?
I think what we're doing is the narrative is probably the best case scenario is what we're moving towards. So the areas that are indicated on the plan would be reflective of what's in the narrative.
Okay. And is there any changes in the regrading? Is there any changes in grade that you're proposing, or are you gonna use any sort of erosion control matting?
I had not planned on using or doing any grade changes, no.
Okay.
The only activity on that will be foot traffic.
Okay. Do you feel the need to have some sort of, I didn't see any sort of limit of work on the plan, so do you feel like it's going to be restricted to that bank and that you will be able to get onto the bank, with foot traffic and no need for additional sort of erosion controls like blanketing?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
don't think it's an issue. Again, albeit when we were to try and do this early, what we usually do is we'll throw a nurse crop in before we start work, and it's either grain, rye, or oats. As we're working, we work that into the duff layer of the soil, and that is a temporary cover to help hold things. So in essence, it typically becomes a mat of vegetation that adds additional stabilization that then acquiesces over a course of a couple growing seasons when the installed plant material starts to establish. And that's why on this bank, again, just with foot traffic, I didn't necessarily see the need for any, and it's a heavier soil, so it holds together better. So I don't see the necessary need for a erosion control mat. If conditions warrant it, we certainly can lay something down.
Okay.
And it's also a challenge to use erosion control mat in areas where you're just doing vegetation removal.
Right.
Because it doesn't lay flat on the slope, so it doesn't work well. It works better where you take wholesale vegetation out, regrade, and then stabilize.
Okay. So basically, just to summarize, one of the things that I'm seeing from the questions from the commission are things to be added for next time are the performance standards for the coastal bank and salt marsh and adjacent upland resource area, a discussion and photographs of any trees that will be pruned or dead trees that will be removed. Also, is it possible to add a limit of work to the plan or just a note describing what the limit of work is? And those are the only items that I've heard so far.
Yeah, no, I want to underscore what Callie just said about the limit of work. I hear what you're saying, Lindsay, about the difficulty of and the lack of necessity of using an erosion control mat on this, given the kind of work you're doing. But given the steepness of this bank, are you sure you don't need anything to protect the adjacent salt marsh from anything that might erode down while the work is underway?
Again, I don't believe it's necessary, but we do certainly have the opportunity to add that should it become obvious during our course of vegetation removal.
Okay, maybe that's the way to deal with it then. We'll put in the order that at the moment, at the outset, it's not required, but monitoring will be necessary, and if needed, it will be installed.
And I can add that to the narrative as well.
Yes, please. Thank you. Anything else from any other commission members?
I have one more thing, given.
Yes. All right, Dee, you go first.
Given the time of year, Lindsay, are there any changes to your work protocol with regard to timing?
Timing would change, and this would be more of a late summer project at this point, as opposed to late winter, early spring.
So when that means you'll seed then, and then you would install plants in next year?
No, we do it this year. It would just be in the fall.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I, again, can update my protocol.
Okay.
Chronology.
Yep. Thank you. All right, Bob, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, I just have a question for Lindsay. How you doing?
Okay.
The beach plum, you have scheduled to plant beach plum along the top of the coastal bank. You don't think that's going to get too tall to obstruct any views, especially the one towards the terrace? I mean, they can get up to 6 to 8 feet in height.
Yeah, those would probably be just off. I wouldn't plant it so that it becomes a vista issue. at the same time, they do have some existing plant material that is right at the edge of that patio, and that patio is also elevated, I would say 2 feet anyway. So when you're standing up there, the answer, again, sorry, long answer, no, I don't think it's going to be an issue, and we'll adjust it accordingly as we move through vegetation removal.
Yeah, especially the one right by the terrace. Maybe that could be moved back a little bit as you start planting.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else?
I have just two real simple things. Is it possible, and I'm just doing this as the agent that helps move the project into the pre-construction phase. It becomes very complicated when the narrative for a project is the numbers of plants to be installed are not reflected on the actual plan itself. Is there a way to marry the two so that that planting schedule with the amount of plants matches the narrative? Or is there a way, if you don't want to, if you think that the narrative is the best case scenario, some sort of note on the plan that references the narrative? I just think that those two should mirror or mimic each other
I
in
can
some
add those
fashion.
numbers to my plan and add a note to referencing Lindsay's narrative.
Perfect.
That would be great. Thank you. Callie, you had something else? You do one of the.
Oh, Lindsay, can you just add a date to your letter so that when you do the revision, we can track, just add a date line to the header there?
Sure. If you see on the very top, it says reference. It's a Poppleton Conservation Narrative. That was the original date, the 2/16, the revised 3/29, and I'll do another revision.
That's fine. That works.
Yeah, reference number and date.
Oh, I see.
See, yeah.
Okay.
So we'll have 2 revision dates. That's good. That's perfect.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Anything else? Any participants? Is there a motion? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
One last thing, and I didn't put this on here because it was already on the plan. We plan on removing the vegetation. We're pulling it down to the toe of the bank, and there's on the plan it says private or a way, public way off the edge of the pumping station area. We're going to be moving vegetation right along the toe of that slope, right to that pumping station pier area, and we're going to load it out there. We wouldn't be coming up through the yard. It'll be a straight shot right across the bottom toe of the slope. And there is some barberry that's actually growing down in right at the edge of the high marsh, which we'll be taking out as well. Just wanted to make you folks aware of how we were going to get all that vegetation out of there. It looks like a lot, but once you actually consolidate it, it becomes pretty easy to manage.
Okay, thank you. Made a note of that. So I think that with this, as Callie just read, we have you'll do a revised narrative incorporating the performance standards, identifying the trees to be pruned and removed. You'll add a limit of work to the plan. You'll adjust the dates and the timing and adjust the plan to match the numbers of the plants in the narrative and on the plan. Anything else, Callie?
Did you say the limit of work?
Yep, limit of work. Mm-hmm.
Lindsay, and David, I can follow up with you too on the list if that would be helpful.
Super.
Okay. And we'll look for this on June 10th. Do we have a motion to continue to June 10th for these items?
Commissioner Holt, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call to continue to June 10th. Ms. Holt?
Aye.
Mr. Kitts?
Aye.
Mr. Rawls?
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. This will continue to hearing on June 10th. Thank you, David, and thank you, Lindsay.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Okay, notice of intent, 14 Pine Ridge Road, 14 Pine Ridge Road Realty Trust, Cynthia S. Paul D. and Samuel D. Dollinger, Sweden and Swetland trustees, SC 10-3413, proposed construction of an addition on a crawl space foundation, proposed deck expansion at 14 Pine Ridge Road, Assessor's Map 8C, Parcel 24. I believe, is David Little here to represent the project?
Mm, no.
Is there anyone here to represent the project for 14 Pine Ridge Road?
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, unfortunate, but
what do you guys want to do?
Hi,
Do you want-
Callie or Janet.
yes.
Can you hear me?
Stephanie, yes?
Yes, David Little is trying. Do you want to come in over here?
Hello, Janet. David Little.
Hello, David. How are you?
I'm good. I'm
Glad you're
ready.
here.
Yes.
Okay, good. We
I'm
were
having
nervous
computer
there.
issues with my own computer, so forgive me.
So you're looking over Stephanie's shoulder on her computer?
Yes.
Okay.
So should I start?
Yep, go ahead.
So the project, I met with Callie early on to review this, and I spoke with her to address whether to file for an RDA or a notice of intent. And she said, just given the state of everything right now, it would be best to file a notice of intent. So the project consists of a bathroom addition to a dwelling that is located in a flood zone, but significantly over 300 feet away from the adjacent salt marsh and coastal bank on the other side or the east side of Marsh View Road. The addition will be built with flood vents because a portion of it is within land subject to coastal storm flowage. So it's in an area that's totally altered where there's an existing shed. We're moving the shed north of the site. And we felt that just the fact that we were installing flood vents to allow the floodwaters to enter in under it and escape would be sufficient for mitigation because it's in the northwest corner of the lot where they have a garden and the existing shed. And then in addition to that, they want to connect an existing deck in between the addition, a proposed deck in between the addition and the existing deck. So I would hope that this would be considered pretty much of a non-event, but in the event that you wanted to condition it, Callie advised me to submit a notice of intent just in case. All staging would occur within the gravel drive. There's no chance of any stormwater being generated, or there are no stormwater issues on the site currently. I really don't have a lot more to add than that, Janet. So I will turn it over to the commission for questions.
Okay, thank you, David. So access for construction purposes, equipment will be staged in the driveway?
Yes, and they'll walk around the front house, around the left side of the house to
out of the flood zone area?
Yes.
Okay. Access.
And if you had an opportunity to visit the site, that's the common sense place to gain access to do the construction.
Yep.
And it is on a slab foundation, a crawl space foundation with the flood vents within 1 foot of the floor of the crawl space inside and within 1 foot of the grade outside the addition.
And is the addition, is the crawl space going to have a concrete floor or?
Yes, it will. It'll have a concrete dust cover.
Okay.
And then the spot that we're moving the shed to is where they have an existing garden that they're raised beds right now.
Okay. So are the flood vents required by the applicable FEMA requirements
Yes, they're
for building
required
in the flood zone?
both by FEMA regulations and the state building code.
Okay.
But because the cost of the addition is less than 50% of the appraised or assessed value of the dwelling, the remaining dwelling does not have to become FEMA compliant.
Okay. Other questions from the commission? Comments?
Yeah, Commissioner Holt.
Yep.
Does this have to go to ZBA?
Yes, it does, Dee Dee.
Have you filed there?
Bill Litchfield is in the process. I'm very comfortable with the commission moving forward and scheduling this for a working meeting to issue an order of conditions. I don't anticipate any issues whatsoever. They know all their neighbors, and we're hopeful that this will be a fairly simple project.
Yeah, it is modest compared to much of what we see. But I do think that in order for us to be consistent with what we have asked of other applicants who are putting additions in the floodplain, we have asked for additional mitigation, such as putting in plants that.
I have followed those other applications out on Eastern Point in areas like that. And in this situation, we're over 300 feet away from a resource area. There's probably a coastal bank on the east side of Marshview Road, with the marsh even being further away.
But David, you're partially in land subject to coastal storm flowage, right?
That's the issue.
Yes, we are. And it's my experience in other towns, they don't even require a filing for this. Harwich is changing their regulations. Orleans doesn't require a filing for this. They're not trying to penalize people that have had their properties mapped into a flood zone where it's not even remotely close to a normal resource area. If you just drive down Marshview Road, you look at the houses on the other side that perhaps are within a resource area. So if you feel that this is necessary to need mitigation, I will certainly do it, but I felt that a notice of intent wasn't even required for this, and Callie advised me to do so to be safe, and apparently she was right.
Yeah, she's right, David, only because, and it doesn't have anything to do with penalizing anybody. It has to do with the fact that there's construction activity within the resource area itself, within the land subject to coastal storm flowage. So that triggers an examination of the performance standards for that resource area under the bylaw, and it triggers generally you have hardscaping going into a floodplain, triggers the need for some mitigation to enhance the ability of the surrounding area to absorb flood water, to mitigate for that.
If I may ask what you would like to see in the way of mitigation, we will provide it. And I'm quite frankly, I think it's silly, but we will do whatever the commission requires. I think this is an example of why Chatham takes so long to get through their projects. In any other town, this would not require mitigation. This would be rubber stamped and move forward without any issues at all. And I think this is one of the reasons that you're having the difficulty getting through all your schedules. But you tell me what you want, Janet, and I'll provide it.
Wait, I think this is Commissioner Holt again. I don't know if the other towns have in their local bylaw performance standards for land subject to coastal storm flowage. That may be a reason that they treat it differently than the town of Chatham does.
Right, but we do, so we're required to look at it that way.
I understand. So I
Okay.
will do whatever is required.
Okay.
You want to have 2-to-1 mitigation for the area that's within land subject to coastal storm flowage and 1-to-1 outside of it?
No,
No.
there's no buffer for the land subject to coastal storm flowage, so it would just be, like you said, David, you're more than 300 feet from the existing salt marsh, and so it's really land subject to coastal storm flowage, and there's no buffer for that, so I'm just chiming in with that.
Right, so it's the addition itself, it's the 224 square feet of the addition that is
So then
hardscaping
you
within the
would like
floodplain.
a 224 square foot planting plan.
I don't even think, David, I don't even think I've got the plan up here if you can see it from your computer.
Yeah.
This 11-foot elevation is the extent of that 100-foot flood zone. And
That's true, it's not the entire thing,
No,
right?
it's not the entire thing. It's really just the
About half.
about half of it. So
No, I understand. So is that 1-to-1 for the area that's within the resource area?
That's fine.
yeah,
Okay, well, I would request a continuation to be able to provide you with a plan showing the 1-to-1 mitigation area for that.
And so so just to be clear, if about half of that addition is within the floodplain, half is not, at 1-to-1, we'd be looking for about 100 square feet.
And we also have the expansion of the deck, Janet.
Yeah, but the deck is not on grade, right? It's raised, so it does
No,
not.
it's pretty much at grade.
Oh, okay, so we would add that then. So that's another, so it's 200 square feet total.
David, are you proposing any sort of regrading? Is it just
None. No,
No.
it's just we're going to be flattening out the area a little where there's some hillocks.
Is that in the area of the addition?
It's just where the foundation is going. Any material for the small crawl space will be removed directly from the site.
How far down does that go, the excavation?
The footings will go down 4 feet, but the crawl space itself only goes down about 1 foot.
A foot, okay.
If you had an opportunity to visit the site and see the stakes, it's a relatively level area.
It is.
Yep.
Okay, anything else?
Is the commission, two other things, I didn't mean to supersede anyone on the commission. You do need to file with ZBA, and it sounds, I checked with Sarah at the end of yesterday and she hadn't received anything, but you're saying that you expect something soon, so that's great news. And I didn't know if the commission wanted to see a performance standards analysis for the land subject to coastal storm flowage on the local, obviously on the local, for local regulations.
Well, yes, only because if only because we have to write that into our order of conditions that it meets the applicable performance standards. So we would appreciate that being addressed so we can make those required findings.
Will do.
Thank you. Okay, anything else?
Well, thank you, Callie. I guess I shouldn't have done an RDA, so you gave me some good advice.
Great.
She always gives good advice. Okay, is there a motion to continue to June 10th?
Commissioner Holt, so moved.
Okay, second?
Kit, second.
Okay, roll call to continue to June 10th. Ms. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Kitts,
Aye.
Mr. Rawls,
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio,
Aye.
Mr. Clark,
Aye.
chair votes aye. David, we'll see you back here on June 10th and hopefully wrap it up then and move forward to an order.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Get your computer fixed, I hope.
All right, continued hearings, 100 and 102 Cedar Street, Matthew and Susan Botine, SC 103410. Proposed installation of natural gas line, open pergola, seasonal kayak rack, repair, replace existing stairs, patio and fence, upgrading an outside grill area and landscape improvements at 102 Cedar Street, Assessors Map 13C, Parcel 10.
Hello, Thad Aldridge here.
Good morning, Thad.
Morning. Apologies for getting the plan in so late. I figured I'd push forward because the revisions were pretty minor and pretty much resolved at the last hearing. We've changed the hydrangeas over to inkberry. We've added a work protocol for the pergola posts. At the last meeting, we talked about removing the land management plan for landscaping, and we should be good to go. Are there any questions?
Well, I will tell you that I have not yet had a chance to see it. But as I look at my list from the last hearing, those were the
Why don't I mean,
issues.
it's up to the commission what you guys want to do. We submitted it, we received it late yesterday afternoon. I passed it on to the commission this morning. I'm happy to put it up today through Teams since it is relatively minor. Whatever you guys want to do.
Okay, let me just say that that apology accepted for the lateness. That said, you know, we do try to hew closely to our guidelines that we don't consider materials submitted unless they're submitted in a timely manner, 7, sometimes 10 days prior to the hearing. Normally we will insist on that. That said, if, as you say, these are what the changes show on the site plan that we agreed to at the last hearing, I guess, Callie, we can put it up. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but
Yeah.
maybe just to confirm that, and then we will all have time to review that in some more detail after this hearing today.
Okay, here it is. We have two. Again, I didn't look at it in the limited time this morning to confirm. It looks like.
Yeah, it's really hard to try to look at this on this screen at this point.
Well, maybe Thad could point out the changes so that.
Here's one proposed 2-foot landscape bed of 15 inkberry to be maintained.
Yep.
And the other one is a detail that's off to the side. That's the how to put a post in the ground.
Is that your work protocol for the pergola?
Yes. That's on the second sheet.
Okay.
And so all the proposal with respect to the bank and landscape has been taken out of the proposal.
Just the repair of the stairs and the kayak rack remain, but then the land management plan on the bank or the minor plan has been removed.
Okay. Do you know if they have any? Are they thinking about doing that at some point in the future?
They are looking at it, but they're trying to get through one thing at a time.
Okay.
What's the fence detail, Thad? What?
That's the fencing along the western
Fencing
side
over
there
by the inkberry. There's an existing fence there that's at grade. We're proposing to replace that fence. It will have an average of a foot of clearance because it is on a hill. The purpose of the inkberry is just to hide that from sight, that bottom of the fence.
And the details on the stairs are as they were before. That has not changed. Okay.
Sure.
Yes. Go ahead.
Based on just this conversation, you know, I'd be satisfied with going to a work session, closing it at a work session if, once we've had a chance, a week to review the plans, that, you know, there still isn't anything else outstanding, and then we could, you know, go to the order at that work session.
Right, I would agree. We could tentatively proceed, planning on an order of conditions coming out of the work session, but again, I would ask you to come, and if there are issues or questions that commissioners have between now and then, address them at that point, which may or may not prevent the order from being issued.
I would appreciate it.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, I think we'll each review this individually. All right, so with that, is there a motion to continue this to the work session on June 3rd?
Mr. Holt, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a
Kit,
second?
second.
Thank you. Roll call to continue to the work session on June 3rd. Ms. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Kitts,
Aye.
Mr. Rawls,
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio,
Aye.
Mr. Clark.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We'll plan on a work session on June 3rd and with hopes that everything is resolved and we can get an order out.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Janet, do you want to take a short break or?
Yes, at this point, let's just break here for 10 minutes if we could, with apologies to the Locust Lane folks. You can wait 10 more minutes.
Reconvene here a little bit before 10:30?
Yeah, just before 10:30.
Okay, all right.
Thank you all. See you in 10 minutes. All right, we're back. Callie, moving on to the next item on the agenda.
Sure. 41 Locust Lane, Jonathan O. and Alicia W. Downs, SE 103407, proposed removal of 5-bedroom existing dwelling, proposed construction of new 5-bedroom dwelling, pool and septic system, proposed vegetation management at 41 Locust Lane, Assessors Map 15F, parcel 53.
Hi, good morning. It's Stephanie Sequin with Ryder and Wilcox representing the Downs.
Okay, good morning, Stephanie.
Hi, good morning. And I'm hoping Teresa Sprague is out there also.
Teresa is here.
Morning, Teresa.
Good morning.
Okay.
So I'm not
Go ahead.
sure
Go ahead,
how you
Stephanie.
want to start with the good news first.
Sure. always my preference.
And this is regarding the third-party review of the delineation of the resource area, and in particular, the location of the top of the inland bank. And you should have received a memo from Matt Crichton at BSC Group summarizing his findings when he met on site with Callie, Teresa, and myself. And in a nutshell, basically, he found that the inland bank abutting the pond is out at basically at the edge of the pond, as where the current water level is now. It's just a few feet landward of that. So we have added that information onto our site plan, that so it doesn't change the location of the BVW that we had initially flagged and located and shown on our plan. He also verified that those flags are accurate. So the 1,500 foot buffers that have been shown on our site plan remain unchanged.
I'd just like to add, Stephanie, that he also asked for Ryder and Wilcox to add some additional notations on their plan about the level of the pond in its highest state and in its lowest state to accurately reflect the level of the water. And so Stephanie added those to her plan as well.
Okay, thank you. I see that there. So I see all those changes in this plan, and thank you, Stephanie, and your client for accommodating this request. It's just in my years on this commission, this is the first time we've dealt with an inland bank, and we needed to be as sure as possible that we got it right, given the location of the pool and the slope that comes down from the 50-foot down to the edge of the BVW. So appreciate the accommodation with all of that. Before I go into any other questions, so hold on a second. So is there other news, or is there bad news that goes with the?
Well, no, I just wanted to, I wasn't sure how, if you wanted Callie to start off with the results of that discussion.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you've got the information that was submitted, I've lost track, a month and a half ago. And we're happy to, I guess I'm assuming the commission is satisfied with the determination that BSC made, and now we can finish discussing the actual project.
Right. Okay. Let me just let me just turn to the commission and ask if anybody has questions on BSC's report and on the resolution of the inland bank question. Okay. Hearing nothing, I'm assuming they are satisfied. And we did go through in some detail at the last hearing the revisions that were made to the land management and planting plans. Let me ask, let me just start by asking to clarify the grading and the retaining wall. The pool is an infinity pool. So does the back end of the pool act as the retaining wall? where that infinity, I guess you would call it a trench, is located?
So the lower edge or the easterly edge of the infinity trough is a retaining wall. The pool itself, the eastward edge of the pool is also a retaining wall.
Okay.
And I think it's probably more, if you look at the detail that the Easton Pool and Spa provided, that shows the relationship between the wall of the pool and then the lower wall of the infinity trough.
Right. Yeah, I did see that, and that was clear. I just wanted to make sure I understood the elevations and that both of those elements of the pool would be acting as retaining walls since they're connected to the other retaining walls. The other question I had came from, so I see the dry wells, and I assume that those are all connected to downspouts and gutter systems for roof runoff. But do they also contain, how is the runoff from the hardscape, from the patio? Is that also directed to those dry wells, or how is that being managed?
That will be piped. There will be, the patio will be graded to low spots where inlet drains will be installed. And then from there, it will be piped to the dry wells. So the dry wells are sized to accommodate both the runoff from the hardscaping and the downspouts on that side of the building.
Okay. Okay, other questions or comments from other commissioners?
Commissioner Holt, I have one. Right?
Yes.
With an infinity pool, how is overfill of the pool due to a storm managed? Where does the water go? I don't have a lot of experience with that.
Yeah, and that question came up in another town, and the homeowner actually answered it because, quite honestly, I wouldn't know how to answer it either. But it is, as the water flows into the infinity trough, there's a pump that obviously pumps it back up to the main pool, and that's triggered by a level float. So when the water in the trough gets to a certain level, it gets pumped back up to the pool. So I guess that level in the trough is maintained. And there is some freeboard in the pool itself where, like you said, in an extended or a heavy rainfall, there is some freeboard in the level of the pool so the water level in the pool itself can rise to some extent.
But I mean, can't it also just overflow?
If I could, Teresa Sprague with Blue Flax Design. So the trough itself, there's a basin that's just under 4 feet deep. So when the infinity pool flows over, there's that trough, and then there's a basin. If you look at the detail, they're showing at Easton Pool 3 feet 6 inches.
Right.
I mean, it would be similar to any swimming pool that could overflow, but what Stephanie's saying is that the pool itself is not filled to the point where it's right at the edge of the apron. There's some room to allow for water in the case of rain, and obviously water evaporates over time and people have to add water in. So it would function exactly the same as a regular swimming pool.
Okay, but isn't that an issue, a potential issue here if that water goes down the bank?
I mean, even if we received one of the, extraordinary rainfall events that we have actually experienced, where we're getting upwards of, 6 inches of rain in an hour, the pool would not overflow. There's enough play in the pool level that it would allow for that water to rise up. It would just be like any other swimming pool. I've not experienced, and I actually have a swimming pool myself, we have not experienced it overflowing, even in these 8-inch rainfall events that we've had occasionally throughout the past couple of seasons.
Okay. Another question with regard to rainfall is, were drainage calculations done to determine the size of the dry wells?
Yes, they were.
Could you submit those to us?
I could, yes.
Thank you. That's all I had. currently.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Other questions, comments?
Yeah, Bob Rawls.
Yes, Bob.
I'm still looking at the land management plan that was submitted a while back, and I think I talked about this before, but I just want to bring it up again, and that is there or is there not a path down through the mitigated area to the marsh area? I mean, there's obviously an area, is a path-like area all the way down where there are no plants being put, but there's nothing that indicates it's an actual path.
There is a path, they're just similar to the path that's currently existing. It's quite overgrown with raspberries. I did cut it out a little bit so that if any of the commissioners wanted to go down to see the flagging, they were able to access that area. So there is some access area along the slope. With the idea and the intention that at some point, once the house is constructed, the property owners will likely be coming back to the commission with a request for a boardwalk of some sort to access the pond so that they could get a kayak down to the edge of the pond, similar to what abutting properties have. Whether those boardwalks have been approved or not previously. I know directly to the south at 83 Ocean View Terrace, a boardwalk was approved about a year and a half ago to allow access over the bordering vegetated wetland to the edge of the pond. So there is likely a request will be coming in the future. We're just trying to be realistic and knowing that rather than putting plants in the area now and then tearing them out later, we would propose just to keep an open area. And at this point, it will allow for just access on the slope and to the edge of the bordering vegetated wetland. There would not necessarily be any purpose for anybody to go down that path at this time, but we are anticipating that you will be getting another notice in the future with a request for a boardwalk.
Okay, that clears that up. So if, for example, the catwalk or boardwalk or whatever was not approved, what would happen to that path?
We would fill it in and revegetate it. The whole entire area will be seeded, so it won't be devoid of any vegetation. We were just not proposing to put shrubs in that 4-foot area, just to prevent planting shrubs that we'd be tearing out later. But there will be native grasses and wildflowers after the invasive species are removed. The entire slope will be seeded, blanketed, and then follow-up management will continue before the proposed plantings are completed. So the area will not be devoid of vegetation. It won't be any sort of a hardscaped path or anything like that. It would just be maintained as a grassy area. And until such time as a boardwalk is approved, it would basically not be used.
Then that all makes sense. Then I think it would be appropriate to on the plan to say something to that effect, that this is a bare area basically that would be filled in if the future catwalk is not approved.
Yeah, well, it certainly won't be bare. It'll certainly be covered with native grasses and wildflowers, but we can certainly add a note to that effect that we are allowing for a 4-foot wide path down the slope that may eventually lead to a future boardwalk installation as approved by the commission.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
Okay.
Go here.
Yep, go ahead, Bob.
Teresa, the black locust that you plan on removing, cutting down.
Yeah.
How are those going to be treated, and when would you be treating them? With herbicide?
So we will cut them, and we'll cut them a little bit high, treat them. We know we're going to get some suckering. So we generally, when we manage locust, we cut it a little bit high. We do a treatment of the cut stump, which would happen, the soonest it would happen would be fall 2020. Obviously, we're under restriction for bird nesting season right now, so we wouldn't be managing any vegetation. Plus, we know that the later in the season, after bird nesting season ends, September, October is a good time. Herbicide translocates better at that time of year than it does at this time of year. So we'd cut high, treat the stump, we'd wait to see if there's any suckering, we'd cut again, treat the stump again, and then finally it would be flush cut. So the root systems will remain in place, they will not be removed. So they'll continue to act to stabilize the slope. And we suspect there'll be some suckers, and so that would be part of our follow-up management.
Okay, and those are the only trees you're going to be removing, correct? Just the black locust?
There are, and we've noted on the plan, if you look at the plan revisions dated April 15th, 2020, we've counted 13 trees proposed for removal. There's some 2 3-inch black locust, there's 1 large 14-inch black locust, there's 4 12-inch, 1 14, and then there's 1 14-inch leaning cherry. It's in really poor shape, so we're proposing to remove 3 cherry trees, and then the rest are black locust. The trees that the cherry trees that we're proposing to remove are broken, they're dead, they're completely covered in invasive vines. And they've all been flagged in the field.
And would you have to treat the cherries with herbicide as well?
We do not necessarily have to treat the cherries with herbicide. We're not concerned about cherries suckering. If they resprout, they resprout. That's not a problem, and they will resprout after we cut them.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Teresa, just to make sure I'm clear that even though that we've had these various delays, your timeline in the land management plan stands as it was. So work would begin in the fall?
Correct.
You don't need to make any changes to that?
No changes to the timeline.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Callie, do you have anything?
No, I just wanted to confirm that the drainage calculations that Stephanie's submitting are for the patio and the pool.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie, can you verify that?
That's my understanding, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I just asked for.
Yep. I also just wanted to double check with the commission. I know in the past you've asked about the regrading activities for the patio and the pool, and I don't think that was addressed. I think it was sort of an open-ended question from a previous hearing. So I'm just wondering if Stephanie has some further information on the regrading activities.
I have added on the site plan the various elevations of the proposed retaining walls and included the proposed elevation of the patio. You can see in the cross section that we included in the site plan that shows the existing grade as a light dashed line, and then the proposed patio and pool. We're actually doing quite a bit of cutting here. We did, and if you look at the lower end of the pool trough, you can see it's the top of that trough is just slightly above existing grade. So we're not talking about bringing in large amounts of fill. In fact, we have an overall cut of about 400 cubic yards between, and you can see just on the proposed grading, in particular to the south of the patio and behind the garage, we're scooping out that area to create a level grade. So hopefully that's enough to give you a sense of what regrading is being proposed. But overall, it is a removal of material, not bringing in fill.
This is Commissioner Holt, ask a follow-up question to that, the grading? Mm-hmm. You're changing the direction of the grade on the south end of the property, correct? It's,
Where it's currently sloping toward the resource area, that
Right.
is being leveled out.
So Dee Dee, you're talking about the area behind the proposed garage that I'm
Yeah.
showing here?
Yeah.
Right.
So at elevation 44, it would be
Oh,
flat.
so that's showing a cut.
Yeah.
So we're cutting into that grade.
and then it gradually rises? as you
Then
get
it
to-
rises up to match existing grade to the south of the garage at elevation 50.
50.
Mhm.
Okay. And there was a tree in the backyard right now. Is that, I didn't see that one as being marked. Is that staying?
There's an 18-inch locust that's showing on the Blue Flags plan that where it's just to the south of the proposed patio. And that's being, so Callie, if you pull up our revised plan from April 15th, 2020, we have all of the trees marked per the commission's request.
Mhm.
Sorry about that. Let me just get there.
Yeah, no problem. There you go. So all of the trees that we're showing with the red X's are the locusts, and then the 3 cherries that are proposed for removal, and they're all flagged in the field and located on the site plan. So there is that large black locust tree that we are proposing to remove.
All right, thanks.
I just had one last question, and I apologize for being a little disoriented. I was surprised when I visited the site several times that the property line actually looks like it's sort of over onto the neighbor's property on the northern side of the lot.
Mm-hmm.
So there is going to be, these are all on your plan, Teresa, the 48, the 46, and the 44 and the 50 are all proposed grades. So you're grading that area. Is this area where you're planting here, is that actually on the edge of that property, but kind of in their lawn?
It is. So I think you are not the only person who felt disoriented when you went out and visited the site and saw the property line staked the first time. That northern property line is definitely into an area that I believe the property to the north has been managing as their yard space. It looks like for quite some time, some gardens, etc. My understanding is that the Downs family has been in contact and they've had great conversation, and that neighbor to the north understands the location of the property line, and that we'll be planting those cedar trees basically to provide some privacy right at that property line. But that is the property line for this particular property. It has a very weird, for lack of a better term, shape to this property. It also dips significantly to the south behind the garage area. So the property is actually quite a bit larger than it appears to be when you first go out there on the site.
And do you foresee any, Teresa, do you foresee, or Stephanie, any, as you're making these grade changes down, do you foresee any, and there's retainment here and leveling for the patio. Do you see any additional, or maybe it's in your drainage calculations, any additional stormwater that would sort of run down this slope? Or is it just not significantly different than the existing grade and therefore may not be an issue?
Yeah, I don't see that we're changing the slope significantly when you compare the existing contours to the proposed contours on that side.
Okay.
Oh, well, thanks for telling me. I had no idea because it's been ringing.
Okay.
Let me get them for you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? All right, so if what all we need are the drainage calculations for the patio and the pool that Stephanie says already exist. and adding the note to the plan with respect to the path and the hoped for someday subsequent boardwalk. Do we have anything else that we need? If not, I would suggest we take this, if you guys can get that to us by the end of the week, we can take this to the work session.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and what's the date of the work session? I'm sorry,
It's June 3rd, a week from today.
June 3rd. Okay, could I ask two quick questions
Sure.
if everyone else is done?
Yeah.
Okay, the contractor had asked what is typically required as far as siltation barriers. I've called out just a fabric silt fence. And is that generally acceptable, or is the commission likely to want to see straw wattles instead of or in addition to? He's just trying to get a sense for pricing.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, Stephanie, we ask for the silt fence to be dug in and maintained, especially since you're doing a lot of site work there, right up against the 50-foot buffer line and on top of a slope. So I would imagine this project is going to take almost a year to complete. Is that correct?
I would say so, yep.
So making sure that those siltation barriers are maintained throughout the life of the project, so there's no sedimentation of that bordering vegetated wetland at the end of the slope. I typically, as an extra precaution, people put straw wattles in there as well, but that's ultimately up to the commission.
I would recommend that, given the slope and the vulnerability of the BVW at the bottom, would seem to me to warrant a belt and suspenders approach to make sure that all of the land movement work that's going on at the top does not erode and cause a problem down in the wetland.
Did you have another question, Stephanie?
I do have one other question. The proposed spa that's shown to the north of the proposed pool, the Downs are considering putting that on the south side of the pool, basically doing a mirror image from where it's located now to the within the center of the other arc. And it's the patio is symmetrical around the pool, so flipping the spa area to the other side is not going to change the patio or the square footage of the hardscaping or anything else. It would actually, in that location, be a few feet further from the BVW. So I just didn't know if that, I don't want to say if it matters to you, of course it matters to you, but if they decided, once they got into the project that, yes, they do want that on the other side, how should that be handled?
Is it something that they can make the decision now and you can just quickly update the plan for prior to the work session, or is this something that they want to wait and see for some sort of view over the?
I'm hoping that they can make a decision before the work meeting on the 3rd.
I think the easiest approach is if they want to make the switch and it results in no additional coverage or no change in the retainment or the fill or the cut for the slope. If there's actually no change other than the flip flop of the flat patio for where the spa is, then the easiest thing would be to make that decision at this point and revise your plan prior to the work session. If it's something that's going to happen later down the line, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what you're proposing and then how to file. I mean, there's a lot of vehicles in place, but each one of them has their own requirements.
Right.
Oh, okay. All right. So we'll see if we can get a decision before the work session. And
Right.
sorry to bring this up at the last.
No, that's okay. That's fine. But again, it's up to your clients. Either way, it's doable. It's just a lot more complicated once these plans are filed and
Right.
finalized.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one question on that. Would it affect the drainage calculations at all?
No.
Okay. All right.
Okay, do we want to make a motion to continue to June 3rd?
Commissioner Holt, so moved.
Is there a second?
Kit, second.
Thank you. Roll call vote to continue to the work session on June 3rd. Commissioner Holt.
Aye.
Mr. Ketz.
Aye.
Mr. Walls.
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio.
Aye.
Mr. Clark.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We will resume this on the 3rd at the work session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Teresa.
Okay, and then the applications, next up on the agenda for applications to be scheduled for the hearing, those were all covered in the declaration that the chair announced at the beginning of the hearing, and they're also present on the website under her declaration.
All right. Let's just, if anybody is on the call who has joined since that opening and for any of these matters, they have been scheduled for a hearing on August 25th. That's 7 Old Harbor Lane, 267 Cedar Street, 24 Avalon Point Road, and 35 Sears Road.
Okay, and then to the last section of the agenda, under violations, 552 Orleans Road, Hung Gately LLC, regrading of resource areas and sedimentation of salt marsh. So this matter was continued today for several items that were not received. The several items were an updated site plan showing the grades, especially near the large vertical cut that was made up near the side of the house. The commission also asked for the removal of the floating docks that look like a deck-like structure attached to the house. You asked for that to be removed so that there's no confusion about whether or not there's a deck there. And you also asked for coastal engineering to provide calculations for the amount of fill that would be required to bring the site back up to grade. In addition to those items, there was some concern about whether or not, we had photographs or we could really identify the pre-existing condition of that site and those resource areas prior to the 2 enforcements that have gone on that site by the property owner. And so what I did is I reached out to the neighbors and asked for photographs of the site to see what the existing grade was. And I provided those to the commission, and I just wanted to take a minute to quickly go through those. Is that okay?
Yep.
So the photographs, this is taken from the neighbor's property, and this is the Gately house here. And so and this is the large vertical cut that was made, and then this whole area was flattened. And so what you can see here is that there is vegetation removed here, there is vegetation removed here, as well as significant grading, and also the vegetated buffer strip that did exist there in relation to Frostfish Creek was removed. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Here it is from another view looking at the driveway, and all of this has been since regraded and flattened, as we showed in numerous times over the last year of the violation. This is another view showing that vegetation, and also a little hint of that vegetated buffer strip there that has also been removed and regraded. This was photographs of the first violation that was in the 2017-2018 timeframe, where he installed, this was before my time as the agent, so he installed these floating docks in the marsh as a walkway, and it looks like, portions of it actually ended up next to the driveway here. And here we are in the violation that we have now, and you can see this large vertical cut, which we've seen numerous times in the other photographs. And that's just a close-up when I was on site last week. You can see it's actually starting to become unconsolidated, and there's degraded silt fence in the area, which you can see up here, but it is largely open sediment with the silt fencing sort of falling apart over the last year. Just to show you, when I was asking the neighbors for their photographs, I took the same vantage point side by side. So this is some time ago before the violation, and this is the current state that it's in. And so you can really see here that the vegetation was removed here. This slope has been really altered. The vegetation has been removed, and most notably, the vegetated buffer strip that's here is also no longer present. And so there's also floating docks that are in various stages of disrepair that are holding up that change in grade. So we asked for those items at the last hearing. We did not receive those items. And so I guess today from the commission, I would look to you to decide whether or not you want to further amend the enforcement order, or the possibility of reaching out to town council again for a possible next steps, because we had originally gone through this enforcement process. We got town council involved, who submitted a letter to the applicant, and as soon as we received some plans and some initiation on the part of the homeowner to fix the violation and get it back into compliance, we sort of backed off on some of those requirements in that letter. So I guess today I'm asking whether or not the commission wants to vote to reach out to town council again to ask for another letter to be submitted to the homeowner to get further compliance and get this wrapped up.
Well, in addition to that, so the answer is yes. My recommendation would be that we issue an amended enforcement order that contains the requirements that were supposed to have been submitted, so that we have current good information to work from, and that we initiate a process of conferring with town council about, I mean, frankly, we've done what we can do to force compliance. We assessed fines. I do understand that the homeowner has been battling a life-threatening illness. That was the other reason that we backed off, to give him some time to get through some recovery, hopefully. But we haven't heard anything, and nothing has been submitted that was supposed to be submitted. And I don't know that assessing further fines is going to have any effect on getting compliance, and that our next steps, and this is what we would need to consult with town council on, would be to send this to the Superior Court and ask a judge to issue an order requiring compliance.
Okay, is there a vote?
Let me just ask before we do that, anybody, other thoughts from anybody about what we could do?
No, this is Commissioner Holt. We've been messing around with this for a long time. I think it's time to, put this to bed, so to speak. And I think your suggestion is a good one.
We've been patient and given them every opportunity to, but looking at the current condition and what's happening in the unconsolidated soil being exposed, and the fact that the silt fences have deteriorated, things have actually gotten worse at the site. And if the owner will not listen to our orders to comply, an order from a judge may be what's needed to get that to happen.
This is Bob Rawls. To refresh my memory, does this owner have any sort of representatives other than, I think there was a friend or something like that?
Yeah, they did designate, I think his name is Mr. Godfrey, as their representative while Mr. Gately was in the hospital and unable to act. So this person is, Mr. Godfrey is acting on his behalf as his representative.
Have we heard anything from him, Callie? Has he had any communication with us in any way?
Not since the pandemic started.
Okay. But he's received notices of these hearings, of these enforcement hearings.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
He would through his representatives, which are also Coastal Engineering and Nick Crawford.
Right, those are the other two.
And
Yeah,
the enforcement hearing is always posted on our town website as well.
okay. Well, and Coastal Engineering and Nick Crawford have both appeared at various times. So
Yep.
presumably they're receiving the notices, and the fact that they're not here today only implies to me that they have not received communication from their client about this.
Yeah, I don't see them on the list.
No. Okay.
All right, so I will then, just to summarize, I'll amend the enforcement order for what we've discussed today and what's still being required. And would the commission be willing to vote today to reach out to town council and initiate the process for
Yes,
getting
and yes, I'll ask for that vote in a second, and we can ratify the amended enforcement order and sign that at the work session next week.
Okay.
Okay. So do we have a motion then to support the engagement of town council with respect to the possible process for obtaining a court order?
Commissioner Holt, so moved.
Kids, second.
Thank you. Roll call vote on the motion. Ms. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Kitts,
Aye.
Mr. Walls,
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio,
Aye.
Mr. Clark.
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Okay, so we'll continue this to the work session then to ratify the enforcement order.
Yep.
The work session on the 3rd of June.
June 3rd, yes.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is 14 Potnomaket Road, owner William G. Aschenbach. Vegetation clearing, regrading, construction of a stone wall, patio, fire pit, trampoline, ball court, and wooden soundboard / movie screen. Mr. Riley submitted a series of photographs, which I also submitted to you, which was just an explanation, I think, from the homeowner with photographs. Unfortunately, this project is also in the same state as the violation previously, in that we didn't receive any of the submitted materials that we required. I reached out to Mr. Riley for site access authorization the day after the hearing via email and didn't receive a response on that. We also asked for the property to be staked. But of course, since we don't have access to the site, there was no way to identify whether or not the site had been staked. We did receive the series of photographs, which I'm happy to present to you. I know Bill Riley is on the call. Do you guys want to see the photographs?
Yes, let's put them up so we have a common point of reference.
Sure.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Riley.
we've also submitted a plan by Phil Cheney.
Yes, a restoration plan.
Right.
That was discussed at the last hearing.
Right.
You just failed to mention it at this meeting, that's all.
What do you, because you already submitted it and you guys already discussed it. Okay. So it's a series of photographs with some narrative below it. I'm happy to scroll through it as you guys see fit.
Okay, can you enlarge it just a little bit?
Sure. I'll just lose some of the narrative.
Yeah,
okay?
right. That's okay. Yeah, the narrative, this is September 2018, and it's showing the trees that were existing at that time. Some stumps, some actual trees.
And then down here is January of 2019. This is the area that we've been talking about. And then this is May of 2019. This was around the time, I think, when we submitted the initial enforcement, but I can double check the dates.
It would be around that time. Can you go up to the previous photo?
Sure.
Oh, it keeps jumping. There you go. April. So just before the construction of the volleyball court.
Yep.
This is the grading that was done.
Yep. And then, and that's it.
Okay.
So I would imagine that, so this is this is a year ago. So if this area, again, we don't have site access, but it did look from some of the previous photos taken from an area where I do have access. It does look like there's some grasses that have grown in around this area.
All right, so, this is Bill Riley, if you didn't get the site access authorization, that's my fault. We forwarded it to Mr. Aschenbach, he signed it immediately, and I thought we'd forwarded it on. I know the property's been staked, because Mr. Aschenbach reported to me that Mr. Del Vecchio visited the site, and that it was staked out. So, shortly after the initial letter went out, Mr. Aschenbach retained David Clark to do a site plan, which is the basis of the plan for Phil Cheney. And Mr. Aschenbach attempted to have an on-site meeting with Callie. They tried to set it up by telephone, and that invitation was never accepted. So Mr. Aschenbach, unfortunately, just assumed, well, I guess nobody really cares. And so a year passed before, he actually retained me, and we got things hopefully moving. Again, I want to point out, despite Callie's reference to the previous violation hearing you just had, Mr. Aschenbach has been engaged in this and has engaged professionals to address the issues. And we want to point out that, the shown on the site plan, none of this works in the 0 to 50. Some of it's in the 50 to 100, and that, as we previously reported, Mr. Aschenbach, a do-it-yourselfer, used a 100-foot hose as a measure, and he believed he was outside the jurisdiction of the commission when he did the work. So this is, it's not a willful violation, it's an inadvertent violation. The pictures that he provided make it clear that the satellite photos that were put up at the last meeting really don't reflect the openness of this particular site when Mr. Aschenbach acquired title to the property. Mr. Aschenbach reported to me that the reason the big tree in the first picture, with the one with the arrows and circles, his landscaper said, "Oh, that's a widowmaker. You should take that tree down." So that was his motivation for removing that tree. And then he's got, they have active young sons, and Mr. Aschenbach wanted to, provide them with a place to, have athletic activities. And so that was they say that's the motivation. He understands now that he should have applied prior to doing the work. He should have hired an engineer first to make sure he was outside the jurisdiction of the commission. And naturally, he regrets his error. He's on the. Oh, maybe he's not. I believe he's on the call. Yeah, Bill's on the call. So and I will again restate what I said last time, which is, if he had made the application with appropriate mitigation, I believe his request would have been granted, because none of it's in the 0 to 50, and there's plenty of opportunity on the property to provide appropriate mitigation for the work that has been done. So that would be our presentation here.
All right, thank you.
And I am on too. If if the committee would seek, needs additional context or clarification, so please feel free.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ashmak. I appreciate that. I think we spent a lot of time trying to understand and clarify the history of what happened when. But at some point, at this point, clearly, I don't know that that matters so much. It happened over iteratively over a period of time, and what we have now is the situation that's currently existing. I think we have a choice to make, and that is whether we require full compliance with the enforcement order and removal of the court and the trampoline, and in which case, as Mr. Riley correctly points out, Mr. Rauschenbach is free to apply, to submit an NOI to do this very work. And so I think it's important to, at some point, it's important to remove this from the context of a violation when we're looking at it in terms of whether this activity would have qualified for an order of conditions. The fact that it was done without one is a separate issue, and we can address that in a moment. But looking at just the activity, it's important for us to look at that and say, would we have been able to condition this in such a way in the 50 to 100 that it would comply with the performance standards and an order of condition could have been issued? My own view of that is that Mr. Riley is correct in that it probably could have given sufficient mitigation. And I think what was submitted as a restoration plan, it would not be sufficient mitigation. And I also think that given that this is where it comes back into the context of being a violation, because we don't want to incentivize people moving ahead without permits in place, there needs to be some sort of additional requirements that act as some sort of a deterrent. So with that, so those are our choices. We can issue an enforcement order that requires removal. We can issue an enforcement order that says submit an NOI, or we can issue an enforcement order that accomplishes the same thing as where an NOI would land us in terms of what can remain, what needs to be restored, and what requirements would come into place in that. I'm willing to consider that with some pretty robust restoration requirements in terms of removal of the turf lawn that's in the buffer zone, full restoration of that area around the volleyball court and the trampoline, requirements that be allowed to naturalize, requirements that it be demarcated in some way. I understand the desire to have access to both, so some sort of a pathway could exist to connect the two and access them, but not a whole open turf lawn. I would not support that. With the usual kinds of monitoring and reporting requirements, I would be willing to consider that in a final enforcement order. And that's where I'm coming out. I'd be curious. I want to hear what everybody else has to say.
So, Commissioner Holt, I agree. I think going the NOI route really doesn't, it just delays this process of restoring that area. And so just as you suggest, allow them to keep the volleyball court, but require that the area be revegetated. That's my thought. In other words, I agree.
Mr. Del Vecchio here.
Yes, Bob.
Hi, I visited the site yesterday. I wasn't aware that we didn't have permission, in Callie's
Apparently
hand,
we
but
did, but we don't know that, so go ahead.
yeah, well, anyway, I met with Mr. Aschenbach on his property. I realized that, there was a misdeed done with the measuring, but I understand how we got to that measurement. It's probably about 20 feet um, beyond the woods line that where the 100-foot line is. So it's about 20 feet of turf that could be removed. Also, he mentioned that the trees along that wood line against the turf, the new turf lawn that was put in, are not doing well. And I noticed that the loam that was placed on that area to make the turf lawn was put on the tree roots, probably at a depth of about a foot. And that's why those trees are suffering. So the grade has to be changed as well to allow those trees to regenerate and grow to their full extent. Also, I noticed there was some erosion taking place along where the trampoline was put in, along the hillside. The hillside was dug into, so there's some erosion taking place there. So that has to be mitigated as well. And he did mention that he would allow for more plants to be planted along that end of that property line. So I'd like to take that route too. I'd vote in that manner as well, to allow for the area to be improved and revegetated at this point.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Chair?
Yes, Mr. Clark.
I agree with Bob's comments and with yours, except to the extent I would actually want more from the applicant. And what I would do is, in addition to the matters that you've outlined very clearly, both you and Bob, I would suggest that they inform us, give them a week or two, about what else in addition they'd be willing to do to mitigate the problem.
Okay, thank you. I think under any circumstance, this goes back to them to change, to revise the mitigation proposal or the restoration proposal that they've submitted to meet the standards that we're outlining now. It's not our place to dictate what they do. They need to propose that.
This is Bob Rawls.
Yes, Bob.
I think last time I asked for something that I don't think we got, and I still would like to see it, which is whenever we go in on an enforcement order, we often look around and try to figure out whether there were other things that were done that are not apparent to us. And so I asked whether or not the applicant would provide us with a statement as to which things he did after purchasing the property and looking at the movie screen, for example. And I thought we had agreement that they would provide such a statement, and I still would like to see it. And I agree with everything else that's being said, except that whatever mitigation we finally arrive at, I want it to reflect anything that was done by the applicant in the resource area, whether it's within scope of this enforcement order or not.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with that.
I think the commission was, at the last enforcement hearing, was clear that the mitigation, the first set of mitigation on the planting plan from Phil Cheney should be expanded. And so I don't think that we can tell them what to do for this next round. I think just being clear that on that statement again, if that's how the commission feels, that what they provided for that mitigation in that first round in the first enforcement hearing, or I think maybe it was the second, where we saw the plan, where if you want more mitigation, then I just think a statement of you want more mitigation would be helpful.
Yes, I think we've been saying that. We want removal of the turf lawn. We want mitigation throughout that buffer zone surrounding the volleyball court and the trampoline. A proposal for native species to be put there and the area allowed to naturalize.
Okay, and then the demarcation you also mentioned,
Yep.
and then Bob Delvecchio mentioned the saving of the trees through the removal of that excess material around their roots, in addition to the erosion issue that's now been created on the side slope there in the resource area. Sorry, in the back slope there.
Yes. And Bob, just because I want to make sure we're clear, what is the state? You want a timeline statement? Is that what you want to see? Of what was done when? Just one moment, please. Is that what you were saying?
You're talking to Bob. Which Bob?
I'm sorry, Bob Rawls. Yes, what you were just saying about what was done when.
I just want to make sure that
a chronology.
The mitigation that we ultimately arrive at is taking into account all improvements within the resource area made by the owner.
Right.
And so we need to know I don't necessarily need a timeline. I just want to know what he put in and what was there before he bought the house. And that way we can know how much mitigation really needs to be.
The 100-foot line runs right through the middle of the trampoline and the volleyball court. So anything that's beyond that is not in our jurisdiction. That includes the retaining wall, the pool, the movie screen, the fire pit. All of that is outside of jurisdiction. So the only improvements that fall within our purview are the volleyball court and the trampoline.
Well, the movie screen seems to me the movie screen is within the 100
on the line. Okay, I'm seeing it there. Yeah, it is actually on the line.
Well, it's within, and most of it's within the 100.
Okay. Yep. All right, I'm sorry, I cut somebody off who was starting to say something.
Bill Riley.
Yes.
We understand there's going to be additional mitigation. And that's what the plan will, we'll create a plan that shows it.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll try to figure out a way to have a demarcation that is effective.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Last chance to weigh in with what we're willing to accept. All right, I think you have a list then.
Yep, we do. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members.
Should we take this? Will you have that done, you think, by the next hearing date? June 10th?
I believe so. I'll be on the phone with Phil Cheney, who I believe has been here participating by phone right after we get off the meeting, and then get a schedule, and I'll email it out to you.
This is Commissioner Holt, Madam Chair.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Dee Dee.
But we are going to put the requirements into the enforcement order, right?
Yes, it's going to be an enforcement order.
Okay.
We're not going to have an NOI. It doesn't.
Okay. Right.
I agree with that. That is unnecessary at this point. All right, well, why don't we tentatively schedule this then for the 17th and hope we can make that and then move forward to the work session after that for finalization of the enforcement order.
We still need the site access plan. Oh, sorry, the site access form too, because
Yeah, I'll make sure I get forwarded over today, and I apologize. That's my failing and not Mr. Aschenbach's.
All right, do we have a motion then to continue to June 17th?
Commissioner Holt, so moved.
Kitts, second.
I'm sorry, is it the 10th or the 17th? I'm writing down two different dates.
it's
the next
10th.
Hearing date is the 10th. That's what we're going for. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll try to have a plan to you by a week from today.
Okay, that's exactly when we would need it. So roll call for continuance to the 10th. Ms. Holt,
Aye.
Kitts, Joe?
Sorry.
Okay,
didn't-
thank you. It's okay. Mr. Rawls,
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio,
Aye.
Mr. Clark,
Aye.
chair votes aye. Take this to June 10th. All right.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Riley and Mr. Haschenbach. Is that a wrap, Callie? Is
What?
that a wrap? Are we done?
Yeah, that's it on the agenda.
Yay.
Commissioner Holmes, move adjournment. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Move adjournment?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call to adjourn, Ms. Holt.
Aye.
Kitts,
Aye.
Rawls,
Aye.
Mr. Delvecchio,
Aye.
Mr. Clark.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We are adjourned at 11:34.
Just before we go, I just want to reiterate